The Eastlof Errol series by Revan includes the books Beggar, Thief, Warrior, and King, respectively, published sometime in the Third Era, prior to the Oblivion Crisis. Originated in the province of Cyrodiil. Entered into the Synod Library on the 4th of Sun's Height, 4th Era, 452. Dictated by head scribe Cassius Quill to the scribe initiate Maxima Bruchius for transcription. Beggar, the first chapter in the adventures of Eastlof Errol. Estlof Errol was the last of the litter of 5 born to the queen of the prosperous Nordic kingdom of Errolgard Lapercopa, and her husband, the king of Errolgard, Itluof. During pregnancy, the queen had been more than twice as wide as she was tall, and the act of delivery took 3 months and 6 days after it had begun. It is perhaps understandable that the Lapercopa elected, upon expelling Eastlof to frown, say, "Good riddance," and die. Like many Nords, Itluof did not care very much for his wife and less for his children. His subjects were puzzled, therefore, when he announced that he would follow the ancient tradition of his people of Atmora of following his beloved spouse to the grave. They had not thought they were particularly in love, nor were they aware that such a tradition existed. Still, the simple people were grateful, for the little royal drama alleviated their boredom, which was and is a common problem in the more obscure parts of northern Skyrim, particularly in wintertide. He gathered his household staff and his 5 fat, bawling little heirs in front of him and divided his estate. To his son Enope he gave his title. To his son Lernu he gave his land. To his son Suibud he gave his fortune. To his daughter Lacifitra he gave his army. Itluof's advisors had suggested he keep the inheritance together for the good of the kingdom, but Itluof did not particularly care for his advisors, or the kingdom for that matter. Upon making his announcement, he drew his dagger across his throat. One of the nurses, who was rather shy, finally decided to speak as the king's life ebbed away. "Your Highness, you forgot your 5th child, little Eastlof." Good Itluof groaned. It is somewhat hard to concentrate with blood gushing from one's throat, after all. The king tried in vain to think of something to bequeath, but there was nothing left. Finally, he sputtered irritably, "Eastlof should have taken something then," and died. That a babe but a few days old was expected to demand his rightful inheritance was arguably unfair. But so Eastlof Errol was given his birthright with his father's dying breath. He would have nothing but what he had taken. Since no one else would have him, the shy nurse, whose name was Druzhba, took the baby home. It was a decrepit little shack, and over the years that followed, it became more and more decrepit. Unable to find work, Druzhba sold all of her furnishings to buy food for little Eastlof. By the time he was old enough to walk and talk, she had sold the walls and the roof as well, so they had nothing but a floor to call home. And if you've ever been to Skyrim, you can appreciate that that is scarcely sufficient. Druzhba did not tell Eastlof the story of his birth, or that his brothers and sister were leading quite nice lives with their inheritances, for, as we have said, she was rather shy and found it difficult to broach the subject. She was so painfully shy, in fact, that whenever he asked any questions about where he came from, Druzhba would run away. That was more or less her answer to everything, to flee. In order to communicate with her at all, Eastlof learned how to run almost as soon as he could walk. He couldn't keep up with his adopted mother at first, but in time he learned to go toe-heel if he anticipated a short but fast sprint, and heel-toe if it seemed Druzhba was headed for a long-distance marathon flight. He did not get all the answers he needed from her, but Eastlof did learn how to run. The kingdom of Errolgard had, in the years that Eastlof was growing, become quite a grim place. King Enope did not have a treasury, for Suibud had been given that. He did not have any property for income, for Lernu had been given that. He did not have an army to protect the people, for Lacifitra had been given that. Furthermore, as he was but a child, all decisions in the kingdom went through Enope's rather corrupt council. It had become a bureaucratic, exploitative land of high taxes, rampant crime, and regular incursions from neighboring kingdoms. Not a particular unusual situation for a kingdom of Tamriel, but an unpleasant one nonetheless. The time finally came when the tax collector arrived to Druzhba's hovel, such as it was, to collect the only thing he could, the floor. Rather than protest, the poor shy maid ran away, and Eastlof never saw her again. Without a home or a mother, Eastlof did not know what to do. He had grown accustomed to the cold open air in Druzba's shack, but he was hungry. "May I have a piece of meat?" he asked the butcher down the street. "I'm very hungry." The man had known the boy for years, often spoke to his wife about how sorry he felt for him, growing up in a home with no ceilings or walls. He smiled at Eastlof and said, "Go away or I'll hit you." Eastlof hurriedly left the butcher and went to a nearby tavern. The tavern keeper had been a former valet in the king's court and knew that the boy was by right a prince. Many times he had seen the poor ragged lad in the streets and sighed at the way fate had treated him. "May I have something to eat?" Eastlof asked this tavern keeper. "I'm very hungry." "You're lucky I don't cook you up and eat you," replied the tavern keeper. Eastlof hurriedly left the tavern. For the rest of the day, the boy approached the good citizens of Erilgard, begging for food. One person had thrown something at him, but it turned out to be an inedible rock. As night fell, a raggedy man came up to Eastlof and, without saying a word, handed him a piece of fruit and a piece of dried meat. The lad took it, wide-eyed, and as he devoured it, he thanked the man very sweetly. "If I see you begging on the streets tomorrow," the man growled, "I'll kill you myself. There are only so many beggars we of the guild allow in any one town, and you make it one too many. You're ruining business." It was a good thing Eastlof Errol knew how to run. He ran all night. Thief, the second chapter in the adventures of Eastlof Errol. Eastlof discovered that among the ways of getting food, asking for it was the most troublesome. Far easier was finding it in the wilderness or taking it from unguarded market stalls. The only thing worse than begging to get food was begging for the opportunity to work for the money to buy it. That seemed needlessly complicated. No, as far as Eastlof was concerned, he was best off being a scavenger, a beggar, and a thief. He committed his first act of thievery shortly after leaving Erilgard, while in the southern woods of Tambarker, in the rugged land near Mount Jensen, just east of the village of Horbeld. Eastlof was starving, having not eaten anything but a rather scrawny, raw squirrel in 4 days, and he smelled meat cooking and then found the smoke. A band of minstrel bards was making camp. He watched them from the bushes as they cooked and joked and flirted and sang. He could have asked them for food, but so many others had refused him before. Instead, he rushed out, grabbed a piece of meat from the fire, and wincing from the burns, scrambled up to the nearest tree to devour it while the bards stood under him and laughed. "What's your next move, thief?" giggled a fair, red-headed woman who was covered with tattoos. "How do you intend to disappear without us catching and punishing you?" As the hunger subsided, Eastlof realized she was right. The only way to get out of the tree without falling in their midst was to take the branch down to where it was hung over a creek. It was a drop off a cliff of about 50 feet. That seemed like the wisest strategy, so Eastlof began crawling in that direction. "You do know how to fall, boy," called out a young Khajiit, but a few years older than Eastlof, thin but muscular, graceful in his slightest movements. "If you don't, you should just climb down here and take what's coming to you. It's idiotic to break your neck when we'd just give you some bruises and send you on your way." "Of course I know how to fall," Eastlof called back, but he didn't. He just thought the trick of falling was to have nothing underneath you and let nature take its course. But 50 feet up when you're looking down is enough to give anyone pause. "I'm sorry to doubt your abilities, Master Thief," said the Khajiit, grinning. "Obviously you know to fall feet first with your body straight but loose to avoid cracking like an egg. It seems you are destined to escape us." Eastlof wisely followed the Khajiit's hints and leapt into the river, falling without much grace but without hurting himself. In the years that followed, he had to make several more drops from even greater heights, usually after a theft, sometimes without water beneath him, and he improved the basic technique. When he arrived in the western town of Jotunheim on the morning of his 21st birthday, it didn't take him long to find out who was the richest person, most deserving of being burgled. An impregnable palace in a park near the center of town was owned by a mysterious young man named Suibud. Eastlof wasted no time finding the palace and watching it. A fortified palace, he had come to learn, was like a person, with quirks and habits beneath its hard shell. It was not an old place. Evidently whatever money this Suibud had come into was fairly recent. It was regularly patrolled by guards, implying that the rich man was fearful of being burgled, with good reason. The most distinctive feature of the palace was its tower, rising 100 feet above the stone walls, doubtless giving the occupant a good defensive view. Eastlof guessed that if Suibud was as paranoid as he guessed him to be, the tower would also provide a view of the palace storehouse. The rich man would want to keep an eye on his fortune. That meant that the loot couldn't be directly beneath the tower, but somewhere in the courtyard within the walls. The light in the tower shone all night long, so Islof boldly decided that the best time to burgle was by the light of day, when Suibud must sleep. That would be the time the guards would least expect a thief to pounce. And so, when the noon sun was shining over the palace, Islof quickly scaled the wall near the front gate and waited, hidden in the crenellations. The inner courtyard was plain and desolate, with few places to hide, but he saw that there were 2 wells. One the guards used from time to time to draw up water and slake their thirst, but Islof noticed that guards would pass by the other well, never using it. He waited until the guards were distracted, just for a second, by the arrival of a merchant in a wagon, bearing goods for the palace. While they were searching his wagon, Islof leapt, elegantly, feet first, from the wall into the well. It was not a particularly soft landing, for as Islof had guessed, the well was not full of water, but gold. Still, he knew how to roll after a fall, and he didn't hurt himself. In the dank subterranean storehouse, he stuffed his pockets with gold and was about to go to the door, which he assumed would lead to the tower, when he noticed a gem the size of an apple, worth more than all the gold that was left. Islof found room for it down his pants. The door did indeed lead to the tower, and Islof followed its curving stairwell up, walking quietly but quickly. At the top, he found the master of the palace's private quarters, ornate and cold, with invaluable artwork and decorative swords and shields on the walls. Islof assumed the snoring lump under the sheets was Suibud, but he didn't investigate too closely. He crept to the windows and looked out. It was going to be a difficult fall, for certes. He needed to jump from the tower, past the walls, and hit the tree on the other side. The tree branches would hurt, but they would break his fall, and there was a pile of hay he had left under the tree to prevent further injury. Islof was about to leap when the occupant of the room woke up with a start, yelling, "My gem!" Islof stared at him for a second, wide-eyed. They looked alike. Not surprising, since they were brothers. Warrior, the 3rd chapter in the adventures of Islof Errol. Suibud Errol did not know much of his past, nor did he care to. As a child, he had lived in Errolgard, but the kingdom was very poor and taxes were as a result very high. He was too young to manage his abundant inheritance, but his servants, fearing that their master would be ruined, moved him to Jotunheim. No one knew why that location was picked. Some old maid, long dead now, had thought it was a good place to raise a child. No one else had a better idea. There may have been children with a more pampered, more spoiled existence than young Suibud, but that is doubtful. As he grew, he understood that he was rich, but he had nothing else. No family, no social position, no security at all. Loyalty, he had found out on more than one occasion, could not truly be bought. Knowing that he had but one asset, a vast fortune, he was determined to protect it, and if possible, increase it. Some otherwise perfectly nice people are greedy, but Suibud was that rare accident of nature or breeding who has no other interest but acquiring and hoarding gold. He was willing to do anything to increase his fortune. Most recently, he had begun secretly hiring mercenaries to attack desirable properties, and then buying them when no one wanted to live there anymore. The attacks would then, of course, cease, and Suibud would have profitable land which he had purchased for a song. It had begun small, with a few farms, but recently he had begun a more ambitious campaign. In north-central Skyrim, there is an area called the Alto, which is of unique geographical interest. It is a dormant, volcanic valley surrounded on all sides by glaciers, so the earth is hot from the volcano, but the constant water drizzle and air is frigid. A grape called Jasbe grows there comfortably, and everywhere else in Tamriel it withers and dies. The strange vineyard is privately owned, and the wine produced from it is thus rare and extremely expensive. It is said that the emperor needs the permission of the Imperial Council to have a glass of it once a year. In order to harass the owner of the Alto into selling his land cheap, Suibud had to hire more than a few mercenaries. He had to hire the finest private army in Skyrim. Suibud did not like spending money, but he had agreed to pay the general of the army, a woman called Lysiphetra, a gem the size of an apple. He had not given it to her yet. Payment was to be delivered on the success of the mission, but he had trouble sleeping, knowing that he was going to be giving up such a prize. He always slept during the day so he could watch his storehouse by night when he knew thieves were about. That brings us up to this moment when, after a fitful sleep, Suibud woke up at about noon and surprised a thief in his bedroom. The thief was Islaf. Islaf had been contemplating a leap from the window, 100 feet down, into the branches of a tree beyond the walls of the fortified palace, and a tumble into a stack of hay. Anyone who has ever attempted such a feat will testify that it takes some concentration and nerve to do such a thing. When he saw that the rich man sleeping in the room had awakened, both left him, and Islaf slipped behind a tall ornamental shield on display to wait for Suibud to go back to sleep. Suibud did not go back to sleep. He had heard nothing, but could feel someone in the room with him. He stood up and began pacing the room. Suibud paced, and gradually decided that he was imagining things. No one was there. His fortune was safe and secure. He was returning to his bed when he heard a clunk. Turning around, he saw the gem. The one he was to give to Lysiphetra on the floor by the Atmoran cavalry shield. A hand reached out from behind the shield and grabbed it up. "Thief!" Suibud cried out, grabbing a jeweled Akaviri katana from the wall and lunging at the shield. The fight between Islaf and Suibud will not go down in the annals of great duels. Suibud did not know how to use a sword, and Islaf was no expert at blocking with a shield. It was clumsy. It was awkward. Suibud was furious, but was psychologically incapable of using the sword in any way that could damage its fine filigree, reducing its market value. Islaf kept moving, dragging the shield with him, trying to keep it between him and the blade, which is, after all, the most essential part of any block. Suibud screamed in frustration as he struck at the shield, bumping its way across the room. He even tried negotiating with the thief, explaining that the gem was promised to a great warrior named Lysiphetra, and if he would give it back, Suibud would happily give him something else in return. Islaf was not a genius, but he did not believe that. By the time Suibud's guards came to the bedroom in response to their master's calls, he had succeeded in backing the shield into a window. They fell on the shield, having considerably more expertise with their swords than Suibud did, but they discovered that there was no one behind it. Islaf had leapt out the window and escaped. As he ran heavily through the streets of Jotunheim, making jingling noises from the gold coins in his pockets, and feeling the huge gem chafe where he had hidden it, Islaf did not know where he should go next. He only knew that he could never go back to that town, and he must avoid this warrior named Lysiphetra, who had claims on the jewel. King, the final chapter in the adventures of Islaf Errol. We last left Islaf Errol fleeing for his life, which was a common enough occurrence for him. He had stolen a lot of gold and one particularly large gem from a rich man in Jotunheim named Suibud. The thief fled north, spending the gold wildly, as thieves generally do, for all sorts of illicit pleasures, which would no doubt disturb the gentleman or lady reading this, so I will not go into detail. The one thing he held on to was the gem. He didn't keep it because of any particular attachment, but because he did not know anyone rich enough to buy it from him. And so he found himself in the ironic situation of being penniless and having in his possession a gem worth millions. "Will you give me a room, some bread, and a flagon of beer in exchange for this?" he asked a tavern keep in the little village of Cravenswald, which was so far north it was half situated on the Sea of Ghosts. The tavern keep looked at it suspiciously. "It's just a crystal," Islaf said quickly. "But isn't it pretty?" "Let me see that," said a young armor-clad woman at the end of the bar. Without waiting permission, she picked up the gem, studied it, and smiled not very sweetly at Islaf. "Would you join me at my table?" "I'm actually in a bit of a hurry," replied Islaf, holding his hand out for the stone. "Another time?" "Out of respect for my friend, the tavern keep here, my men and I leave our weapons behind when we come in here," the woman said casually, not handing the gem back, but picking up a broom that was sitting against the bar. "I can assure you, however, that I can use this quite effectively as a blunt instrument. Not a weapon, of course, but an instrument to stun, medicinally crush a bone or two, and then, once it is on the inside—" "Which table?" asked Islaf quickly. The young woman led him to a large table in the back of the tavern where 10 of the biggest Nord brutes Islaf had ever seen were sitting. They looked at him with polite disinterest, as if he were a strange insect, worth briefly studying before crushing. "My name is Lysiphetra," she said, and Islaf blinked. That was the name Suibud had uttered before Islaf had made his escape. And these are my lieutenants. I am the commander of a very large independent army of noble knights, the very best in Skyrim. Most recently, we were given a job to attack a vineyard in the Alto to force its owner, a man named Lernu, to sell to our employer, a man named Suibud. Our payment was to be a gem of surpassing size and quality, quite famous and unmistakable. We did as we were asked, and when we went to Suibud to collect our fee, he told us he was unable to pay due to a recent burglary. In the end, though, he saw things our way, and paid us an amount of gold almost equal to the worth of the prized jewel. It did not empty out his treasury entirely, but it meant he was unable to buy the land in the Alto after all. So, we were not paid enough, Suibud has taken a heavy financial blow, and Lernu's prized crop of Jazbay has been temporarily destroyed for naught. Lysifetra took a long, slow drink of her mead before continuing. Now I wonder, could you tell me how came you into the possession of the gem we were promised? Islof did not answer at once. Instead, he took a piece of bread from the plate of the savage-bearded barbarian on his left and ate it. I'm sorry, he said, his mouth full. May I? Of course, I couldn't stop you from taking the gem even if I wanted to, and as a matter of fact, I don't mind at all. It's also useless to deny how it came into my possession. I stole it from your employer. I certainly didn't mean you or your noble knights any harm by it, but I can understand why the word of a thief is not suitable for one such as yourself. No, replied Lysifetra, frowning, but her eyes showing amusement. Not suitable at all. But before you kill me, Islof said, grabbing another piece of bread, tell me, how suitable is it for noble knights such as yourself to be paid twice for one job? I have no honor myself, but I would have thought that since Suibud took a profit loss to pay you, and now you have the gem, your handsome profit is not entirely honorable. Lysifetra picked up the broom and looked at Islof. Then she laughed. What's your name, thief? Islof, said the thief. We will take the gem as it was promised to us, but you are right. We should not be paid twice for the same job. So, said the warrior woman, putting down the broomstick, you are our new employer. What would you have your own army do for you? Many people could find quite a few good uses for their own army, but Islof was not among them. He searched his brain, and finally it was decided that it was a debt to be paid later. For all her brutality, Lysifetra was a simple woman, raised, he learned, by the very army she commanded. Fighting and honor were the only things she knew. When Islof left Cravenswald, he had an army at his beck and call, but not a coin to his name. He knew he would have to steal something soon. As he wandered the woods, scrounging for food, he was beset with a strange feeling of familiarity. These were the very woods he had been in as a child, also starving, also scrounging. When he came out on the road, he found that he had come back on the kingdom where he had been raised by the dear, stupid, shy maid, Drusba. He was an Erilgard. It had fallen even deeper into despair since his youth. The shops that had refused him food were boarded up, abandoned. The only people left were hollow, hopeless figures, so ravaged by taxation, despotism, and barbaric raids that they were too weak to flee. Islof realized how lucky he was to have gotten out in his youth. There was, however, a castle and a king. Islof immediately made plans to raid the treasury. As usual, he watched the place carefully, taking note of the security and the habits of the guards. This took some time. In the end, he realized there was no security and no guards. He walked in the front door and down the empty corridors to the treasury. It was full of precisely nothing except one man. He was Islof's age, but looked much older. There's nothing to steal, he said. Would that there was. King Enop, though prematurely aged, had the same white blonde hair and blue eyes like broken glass that Islof had. In fact, he resembled Suibud and Lysifetra as well. And though Islof had never met the ruined landlord of the Alto, Lernu, he looked like him too. Not surprisingly, since they were quintuplets. So, you have nothing? Asked Islof gently. Nothing except my poor kingdom, curse it, the king grumbled. Before I came to the throne, it was powerful and rich, but I inherited none of that, only the title. For my entire life, I've had responsibility thrust on my shoulders, but never had the means to handle it properly. I look over the desolation, which is my birthright, and I hate it. If it were possible to steal a kingdom, I would not lift a finger to stop you. It was, it turned out, quite possible to steal a kingdom. Islof became known as Enop, a deception easily done given their physical similarities. The real Enop, taking the name of Elekilnu, happily left his domain, becoming eventually a simple worker in the vineyards of the Alto. For the first time free of responsibility, he fell into his new life with gusto, the years melting off him. The new Enop called in his favor with Lysiphetra, using her army to restore peace to the kingdom of Erilgard. Now that it was safe, business and commerce began to return to the land, and Islof reduced the tyrannical taxes to encourage it to grow. Upon hearing that, Suibud, ever nervous about losing his money, elected to return to the land of his birth. When he died years later, out of greed, he had refused to name someone an heir, so the kingdom received its entire fortune. Islof used part of the gold to buy the vineyards of the Alto, after hearing great things of it from Enop, and so it was that Erilgard was returned to its previous prosperity by the fifth-born child of King Itluoth, Islof Errol, beggar, thief, warrior of sorts, and king.